Hello and welcome to this second panel. Thanks all very much for coming back from the tea break. My name is Tom Sasse. I'm the public policy editor at The Economist. This panel is going to be on the green economy and green business and how Britain is approaching the net zero transition in relation to those areas. So we're going to talk about old and new industries and what the transition means for workers, and what approaches to policy and regulation are needed to help those businesses to thrive and for Britain to really take advantage of its strengths, but also to maintain public support for that transition at a time when that is, as you've all heard this morning, being challenged. So I've got three really brilliant panelists here to discuss that. So on the end, we've got Michael Liebreich. Michael is managing partner at Eco-Pragma Capital and CEO of Liebreich Associates. He's an honorary fellow of the Energy Institute and a visiting professor at Imperial College London. Michael's been an advisor to many governments over the years, but he'll be well known to many of you for his excellent podcast, Cleaning Up. Sue Ferns. Sue is Prospect's Senior Deputy General Secretary. She leads the union's work on energy, science, and the environment. She's a member of the TUC General Council and Executive Committee and is the General Council's lead on energy and environmental issues. So really a great person to talk about this topic and how it relates to workers. And finally, Steve Coulter. Steve leads Green Alliance's work on the economy, finance, industrial strategy, and skills. He's a senior visiting fellow at the LSE, and he previously worked at the Tony Blair Institute and as a journalist at the BBC. So how this is going to work, I'm going to ask my panel some questions for about half an hour, and then we will open it up to all of you. We'll have about 25 minutes or so, and then you will all be released for lunch. Green Alliance will be tweeting, if that is the right word, from their Blue Sky account, using the hashtag GAEvent if you want to respond or react to anything you hear. Okay, so Michael, perhaps I can start with you, and I thought a nice place to start this conversation would be a pair of blogs that you wrote recently, really sort of addressing the climate and energy community and saying that it was time for a pragmatic reset to keep people on board. So do you want to just tell us all what you mean by that?
Right. So, well, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for being here. And it's great to be up here on the panel with my fellow panelists. So I wrote these two pieces actually initially for Bloomberg, and then I put them out onto Cleaning Up as onto the blog, onto the pod and the YouTube channel. And what I was trying to do was to say that we are where we are at this point in history in a number of ways. Clearly, in the US, the election of President Trump, and but then the resonance around the world that has had. So we're seeing in the UK, obviously, with the rise of reform, but all the European countries have got now climate skeptic parties of various sorts. But you can also say, well, Australia, okay, Albanese, but before then, that was a sort of, how can I put it? I don't want to say a near miss, and then Canada. So there's this kind of, the politics has changed from, let's call it Glasgow, right, just for convenience, 2021. But also, we're at a different point in the transition where we've almost got to peak emissions, probably would have got to peak emissions had it not been for the gas price spike resulting from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So we're kind of nearly at peak emissions, a huge success, which is not celebrated nearly enough. But what got us there won't get us further. And partly it's because we now, climate action now moves out into things like heating and transport, and the technologies used in, workplaces. Bakers have to go electric rather than continuing to burn gas for their ovens and those sorts of things. So there's a whole sort of point that we've reached where the old political narratives, the old theory of change won't work anymore. And we're also looking at, frankly, 1.5 degrees has failed. We have gone through 1.5 degrees or are going through it very soon. And if you actually go back to what it would have taken, by the time it emerged from the Paris process, it was already unachievable. And I think it's been perfectly good to spend some time focusing on it and sort of, in a sense, exploring in good faith what it would require to do 1.5 degrees. But there is also, you've also been fueling the pushback by demanding sort of with ever more stridency to achieve a goal which is unachievable. And so the pragmatic climate reset is to say, look, that's where we are, but we also know what we need to do now. A lot of it is, frankly, around electrification. And we've just faced this huge smorgasbord of opportunities for rapid decarbonisation. We know we can do electricity because every country is getting cleaner and cleaner electricity. Even the ones that don't care about the climate or not doing anything ostensibly about the climate are getting cleaner and cleaner electricity. And we know that we can keep doing that. We know we can do transport. We know we can do heating. We know we can do so much of industrial heat. But instead, we're talking about, CCS and hydrogen and aviation. And we're sort of spending all our time talking about the last 5 or 10% and running around in circles with these impossible goals and sticking ourselves to the headquarters of Shell and annoying people on their commutes and doing a whole bunch of things. It's not that hard to see what we ought to be doing. And so that was what I wrote these 2 pieces about.
Great. And in the second part of, I'm sure many people will have reflections on that, which they can write down and chip in with very soon. But in the second blog, you sort of set out some of the sort of provocative ideas around policy and regulation that might help us sort of reach this. Now, we're a bit over a year into this Labour government here in the UK. How would they score against your test? Is Ed Miliband sort of pragmatic enough?
I'm going to preface this by saying I love Ed, and I have had a certain amount of contact with him. I think he certainly knows what I think about hydrogen and a few other things. I mean, tragically, I hate to say it, but clean power, CP30, Clean Power 2030, is the wrong target. It's the wrong overarching goal, because what it's doing is you've already got relatively clean electricity, but that's only dealing with a third of the economy which is electrified, or a third of the end use. It's less of primary energy, and that's a whole other conversation. Primary energy is a stupid metric. But we've only got a certain amount of the economy which is electrified, and what Clean Power 2030 does is, in an incredible hurry with enormous inflationary impacts, pushes you up the cost curve to where things get really costly. But we've got no coherent strategy on electrification of transport, heating, industrial heat, the other stuff. And once you've got relatively clean electricity, you actually achieve much, much more for the climate by electrifying more than you do by becoming even more pure on electricity. So the overarching model, I'm afraid, is not pragmatic.
Okay, not a great scorecard for Ed. Even with the NISO sort of judgment on we'll do sort of 95% and we'll allow a little bit of flexibility.
Well, the manifesto was it was going to be 100%, and you will remember, many people probably remember, there was a sort of debate about, well, is it really 100? And NISO, kind of in a preemptive strike, I think, took out the 100 and it became 95. But the right answer is probably, it's probably 80, 85. By 2030, 80 would be a huge win on the electricity, so a bunch more clean, but also imagine that you could get, more vehicles, more boilers, more of industry using 80% clean heat, and then either putting it through, 80% clean electricity, and then either putting it through a heat pump or eliminating incredibly inefficient diesel and petrol in transportation. Imagine what you could achieve in the next 5 years. And what can I say? Yeah, even after that, the kind of relaxing from 100 to 95%, that's not going to solve the problems. And
okay.
That's where we are.
Okay, Sue, what's your assessment of the sort of choices we've seen so far from this government, and in particular what those mean for the role of workers in this transition?
So the government has just published its Clean Jobs Plan, which from our point of view is really positive. It's got a lot in there about the quality of jobs. Obviously what we want to see is good quality jobs throughout the UK. I think there's a huge opportunity here to transform communities and workforces through better quality jobs, better quality employment. A lot of people are not in good quality employment at the moment. The policy framework, I think, is about right. I think we've got a Secretary of State who is clearly on a mission, so that's good. The challenge now is to get it delivered, and that's what we need to do to build confidence in it. Look, if you happen to work in Port Talbot or Scunthorpe or Grangemouth, you're going to need a lot of convincing to build that confidence in delivery. There are good stories to tell as well. Good stories about the East Coast Cluster, for example. We were talking earlier this morning about the closure of coal-fired power stations, and we were involved in 2 of those, at Cottam and at Ratcliffe, where there was a very good process that involved workers, involved unions, gave people choices, gave people opportunities. But we need to see a lot more of that.
So interesting you mentioned Port Talbot, because that's often one of the examples you can look at where, quite a significant number of job losses, quite a long period of prevarication, and then quite a sort of fast exit or sort of shift. What are the sort of lessons you would take from that for other sites?
Look, the lesson I take from Port Talbot and from other sites as well is, if you do this all in a rush, at the last minute, it's never going to be fair or just for workers or communities. It's not rocket science to work out what we need to do. We know where the heavy emitters are. We know where energy-intensive industry is. We have an opportunity now to make a plan. But the key thing is you've got to involve the people who are going to be directly involved. They've got to have ownership of that plan. It's not for us in this room today to say this needs to happen there or that needs to happen there. We have to trust the people who work in their communities to know best and to properly engage and to genuinely engage with them. And that's what needs to happen for a better outcome. But we've got to gear up for that, and it won't all be done top-down by government. I don't think we're using regional or local stakeholders enough. We're not trusting people enough. Look, I know from our members who worked in coal-fired power stations, what was important to them was not that that particular power station continued to produce. It was what was going to happen when it stopped. What's the outcome for them? Are they still going to have a job? Is it going to be a decent job? What does that mean for their families? And those are all absolutely legitimate questions. If it happened to any one of us, we'd want the same. We'd want some assurances about what was going to happen. It's not a no-change scenario. It's what is that process of change? What does that journey look like for people?
And so you're broadly happy with the employment rights legislation that's currently sort of working its way through? I know some of the significance of that will be in the sort of guidance and the sort of directions that come after it, but you're broadly satisfied with where the government's got to on that?
Well, look, the Employment Rights Bill is a very wide-ranging bill, I think, beyond the scope of the conversation today. In terms of its commitments on good jobs, its commitments for the workforce, I think there are some really important uplifting of rights there, rights that are long overdue. But a lot of it will be in the detail. And what we're engaged in at the moment in the energy sector is talking to the employers and talking to the department about what a fair work charter would look like. And it's those real tangible things that will make a difference to people in their workplaces and in their communities. That's what we should be focusing on. There's a lot of political commentary around the bill. There's a lot of water yet to come under the bridge. But it does represent a generational change in terms of uplifting workers' rights, for sure.
OK. Steve, we saw the industrial strategy in June. What would you say that has sort of told us about how the government sees its priorities for this transition on the green side of things?
Yeah, so we welcome the industrial strategy very much, and the spending review, which also promised a lot of money for the transition, and the Clean Power Jobs Plan, which sort of set out what this is going to mean for industries and communities. And there was an infrastructure strategy as well, which is sort of another of the pieces that you need to do reindustrialisation properly. So I think the government's finally getting its ducks in a row on this. I think it came into power with a sort of slightly unsophisticated message that this is all unequivocally wonderful. It's going to create jobs. It's going to create growth. I think it's realised it's got two messaging problems. There's a problem of trade-offs, and there's a problem of sequencing. The problem of trade-offs was you get people objecting, well, why are you backing all this exotic-sounding net zero stuff when there are proper industries we could be backing instead? The answer to that is look at where we have a comparative advantage. So comparative advantage is things where we're sort of relatively good at doing, given all the alternatives available. So the Resolutions Foundation has done some analysis on this. We have a very strong comparative advantage in clean industries. So we're relatively good at these things, actually better than AI, which is one of the things that the government is really sort of putting its money behind. And we're seeing this. So McKinsey reckons, this is not a niche sector at all. This is the economic opportunity of the century, as the government itself has said. McKinsey reckons there's a market available to UK firms in clean power of up to £1 trillion by 2030. CBI is already, as was mentioned this morning, the CBI points out that in terms of value added, clean power sectors are growing 3 times faster than the rest of the economy. And it's not just kit and technology. We can export business services to make all this stuff run to the rest of the world. We're very good at business services. We have a massive comparative advantage in that. And there's a huge opportunity for this. And the Chinese are running away with this. They're no fools, so they obviously know that this is a massive business opportunity. Circular economy, another huge area which we could exploit. Second thing is, which is possibly more serious, is the issue of sequencing. So net zero takes a lot of upfront investment, and you need to get your ducks in a row in terms of infrastructure, regulation, planning, skills, in order to realize the benefits of that investment, which will come in terms of growth, jobs, energy security, and lower bills. But there is a sequencing problem that you have to put in the investment first, and then you see the benefits. I think it's been slightly undone by its sort of slightly unsophisticated messaging around that. And we have seen issues with high domestic and industrial power bills, which is now starting to deal with. I think there'll be some interesting stuff in the budget. So it's got off to a slow start. I think it's realising that its messaging was a bit unsophisticated, and it's addressing the fact that there's a massive economic opportunity here, and we're good at this stuff. It's not hair shirt. We're good at this stuff, but it does need to think about the things that you were just saying about what happens to particular communities, which may have a rather bumpy transition, and it needs to be putting into place proper long-term plannings in the way that the Germans did when the Ruhr moved out of coal mining 2 decades ago, or Sweden when it tried to decarbonise its own steel industry. It put into place alternatives, it sent out clear signals, and it put its money where its mouth is. And both these regions have done very well, and they're not having this issue with deindustrialisation or radicalisation of the populist right, which is what we're seeing and risk seeing in these areas if we don't get it right.
You mentioned clean power and sort of manufacturing being an advantage. I mean, I've probably, like other people, been up to the Siemens factory in Hull, and I guess one of the criticisms people have had about the UK's role in that sector is we're making the blades, we're not making the cells or the modules, the really high-value parts of that manufacturing chain. Is that something that you think can change, or do you think actually we'd be better off focus on consulting or data or areas where we might have a real strength?
No, not at all. I mean, it's absolutely tragic and almost crazy that we're investing so much in clean power and we're neglecting the supply chains to build these things. So we're building bits of it, but not other bits. So if there's a massive domestic market for these things, it does make sense to actually try and onshore as many of these supply chains as possible. I talk about comparative advantage. You can get a bit hung up on comparative advantages because there are huge opportunities for communities if you're building these things where people are and where they want the jobs. There's also the issue of energy security as well. Do we want to be embroiled in long, complex supply chains for these things when we don't really know who we can trust anymore? Even our best friends, the Americans, can we actually trust them anymore?
And just one point to probe on the industrial strategy. So I think the biggest sort of meaty bit of policy in there was a big focus on trying to reduce industrial energy costs, which of course, our businesses are paying way more than their competitors in Europe or elsewhere, and that's pretty crippling. When I read that document, though, I couldn't quite work out the government's sort of maths on exactly where this money was coming from or who was paying for it. Have you sort of managed to work that out? Do you think it's going to sort of fix that problem?
No, sorry, you're asking Michael?
No, I was asking
sure.
you, please.
I had that exact same feeling as I read all this stuff in June. There was a lot of stuff that came out in June. June was a busy month. This all looked wonderful, yeah, but how do you pay for this? So I think, yes, there is this issue, and obviously sort of thinking beyond industry and net zero, we do have a country that's living beyond its means, has massive debt and deficit problems, bond market vigilantes on the government's tail. Rachel Reeves is in a very, very difficult position. The government's boxed itself in on tax rises. So yes, money is tight, but I think this kind of stuff, and all the economic evidence shows this, if you invest in this stuff, it pays back multiple times over, and you create jobs, and not just any jobs, but good jobs, which will help Labour through its political difficulties with reform, I think.
Yeah. So I'll open up to questions about 5 minutes, but I just want to pick up on a couple of points there. So one is this question of Britain's sort of comparative advantage. I mean, Michael, do you agree with what Steve has sort of set out just there as where we can compete, and are we focused on the right things at the moment?
I need to do this without being too mean, but no, because I mean, that's a very sort of classical, yes, it would be great to make these things and so on. Look, we've become rubbish at making things in Europe. We don't make TVs, why should we make solar panels? And if you can't fix the reasons why we can't make, flat screen, whatever, TVs, we don't really have TVs anymore, but, if we're a bad location to do mass manufacturing for anything, why would it be different for batteries or for solar panels? And if you look at heavy industry, there is no scenario where we become a good country for primary iron reduction. It's just not going to happen. We don't have the cheap sources of energy, and we won't have the cheap sources of energy. I think if I look at the industrial strategy document from June, there was no industrial strategy. There was some stuff about electricity costs, but with no plan behind it. There is a way of reducing electricity costs very decisively, let's call it over the next, 5 to 10 years. But that document didn't cover it. And it's largely to do with getting a virtuous circle spinning where electrification drives volume, and volume will drive electricity costs down. At the moment, everybody thinks, if we use more electricity, if I install a heat pump, it's going to push my costs up. But the real model is that volume will drive the costs down. It'll do it in two different ways. One is the biggest chunk of costs are actually the grid and distribution. It's the fixed cost now. It's not the wholesale. I mean, we should have done REMA. We should have gone to locational pricing. That's absolutely clear to push down the wholesale costs and break the link with gas instantly. But the other big chunk is the grid. And the way you deal with the cost of that is volume. You divide the fixed cost by the biggest possible number, which is all about electrification. So the virtuous circle says get rid of some costs and charges, do wholesale price, locational pricing and break the link with gas, and then volume. And that's the way we'll get the costs down. But they'll never be low enough to do primary iron reduction. And so we've got to be realistic about that. We've got to be realistic about 85% of the economy is services, and we are really good at them, and we're very good at high-value added manufacturing. The UK in 2024, I think it was, 2023 or 2024, was the 8th biggest value-added manufacturing company by value added in the world. We're not some crappy 30th in the world or whatever, which is what, if you read the Independent and the Guardian, you would think. We're not. We're really good at this stuff, but only if it's high value added. We're not going to be making, we're not going to be doing the nacelle is nothing, it's just a box. The blades are actually quite clever and difficult. Would it be nice? It would be really nice to make the solid state switch gear, all the software, all the sensors, and so on. So there are bits that we should own, but we need to be much more surgical about it.
Yeah, one reason they make them in Hull is because they used to have a caravan manufacturing industry there, and they're very good at working with with plastics.
That's a very big caravan, like 120 metres long or something.
Yeah, I found that fascinating. So Michael's he's saying, actually heavy industry, it's going to be very difficult for us to compete on. Obviously, one of the big interventions we've seen from this government so far is Scunthorpe. So, what's your take on this?
So, look, I'm not an economist, but my take on this is we can't make everything in the UK, but we need to make more things in the UK than we are doing at the moment. And we need to redress that balance between manufacturing and servicing in terms of good manufacturing jobs. And I think that there is an opportunity for the government to influence that, because there's a lot of government money involved here in various ways through CFDs, Clean Industry Bonus, all of that. So government has an opportunity to do that. But it does need a sustained industrial strategy. You can't do it for 3 years. You've got to do it for 10 years. You've got to do it for 20 years. And a key reason for doing this is, yes, we want economic growth, but we also want that to be spread to workforces and communities that are really hard up at the moment. And the way that you do that is by creating good jobs. Now, that won't just happen in the market. It will take some government intervention, but we need to be building more supply chains. I agree with Michael, we won't build supply chains in everything, but we need to decide what we should be doing in the UK. It isn't good enough that we're importing components from Far East, Middle East, where we know that workers are being paid appallingly and working in dreadful conditions to do it. We shouldn't be doing that. We need to be raising the bar here and starting in the UK to do that.
Michael, I'll just let Steve come in. So I think we're hearing a couple of different trade-offs here, and it's always good to have disagreement on a panel. So one is over, I think, sort of speed and public consent, which I think actually everyone here is sort of agreed on. Another one is potentially over sort of workers versus consumers and how we think about the sort of most efficient way of approaching this transition. I mean, do you want to come back to...
Can I just say workers are consumers as well? Let's not create an artificial divide there.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, Michael's not wrong. I raised the...
I'll take the win.
But there's always a but.
But.
I mean, it's my fault. I raised the issue of comparative advantage, and you can fetishize comparative advantage. Comparative advantage also changes, and governments can change comparative advantage. At the moment, so we've just done a project on the car industry, for example, and pretty much everybody we spoke to said, yeah, if you were a large auto investor wondering where to build cars, you wouldn't be putting your money in the UK. It's just not the right place for it. But they're there, so they're looking at ways of improving their competitiveness. And one of the ways they're doing that is to actually think about, well, what's the car industry? Okay, we have trouble now, so we want to preserve the industry and preserve the jobs and the know-how. Keep things ticking over for a few years. What's the car industry going to look like in 10, 15 years, though? How is it going to be different? And most experts say it will be very different because we'll have electric vehicles there. The technology for building a car, an electric vehicle, is very different from a conventional car. The things that go in it, electronics, software, entertainment systems, because these things will drive themselves. So while you're in there, you're going to want to be entertained. These are all things that we're really good at. So just saying, okay, well, we don't have any comparative advantage in making cars at the moment, so let's just forget the car industry and, bye-bye to people working in it, which is almost 1 million people. And the car industry is one of those very, very few sources of jobs, well-paid, highly skilled jobs for people who don't have degrees. There aren't many of those jobs anymore. If those jobs go, these people are voting for reform. But if you look forward to, well, what can we be good at in the future, which are these things like electronics, entertainment, sophisticated software, and you start planning and you have an industrial strategy to reach that, then actually you can develop a future comparative advantage.
Okay, Michael, I'll let you come back, but let's open it up for questions first. I've been informed that there were some statements that weren't questions this morning, so we're going to please keep them questions and short questions. I'll take 3, so I'll go 1 here, 1 there, and 1 over there. Yeah, there's mics coming down.
Hi, my name's Jo Blackman. I'm a two hats, Labour councillor and lead on environment in East London, but I also do some work with NGOs campaigning on oil and gas phase out. And I had a question for the panel, particularly for you, Michael, on around carbon capture storage. And what a lot of you said chimes true really with what I've been hearing as well. And I just wondered whether you thought there was a risk that by over-relying on carbon capture storage as a solution, we're baking in a reliance on fossil fuels for longer than is necessary, particularly when we look at proposals for new coal-fired power stations, gas-powered stations with carbon capture storage attached to them. Try to keep that short.
No, that's good. Okay. In the orange.
Hi, thanks. That was really helpful. Rachel Solomon-Williams. I'm Executive Director at the Aldersgate Group. We represent lots of large businesses in the UK. I've got a statement and then a question. The statement is, I'm not sure we need to sell the business opportunities of climate action to businesses in the UK who are mostly convinced that it's in their interests to take action for resilience reasons, for risk management reasons, and for investment opportunity reasons. But there are a bunch of policy issues getting in the way of those investments being made. What one thing would the panellists do to encourage investment into the right changes, particularly on the demand side, which would then unlock those business opportunities?
Okay. And gentleman over here. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Charles Perry, a very interesting conversation. I mean, we are good as Brits on mobilization, if we need to, on innovation, on engineering. And we've talked about the issues with the grid and the costs with the grid. We know it's antiquated infrastructure. So my question is, what about the Internet of Energy? We also pioneered not only the Internet, but obviously going back to the steam engine. We've got a lot of track record in things we've pioneered. So what about the role on decentralization, which we don't seem to come back to much these days? We seem to have given up ever since Cut the Green crap in 2012. We've given up on decentralization. I'm talking about the opportunity of creating the Internet of Energy like we created the Internet of Information. What's your view on that?
Okay. Michael, carbon capture and storage.
Can I just do car industry?
Okay, come back very quickly.
Because otherwise, I'll forget otherwise. The UK is a fantastic place to make cars, right? Anybody who says otherwise is not paying attention. But you know, composite, all the things you talked about, and composites and whatever. And we've got the, you know, whatever it is, 70% of all the sports cars in the world made in the, you know, in the UK. Interestingly, what saved the UK car industry, the large scale, was Nissan Sunderland. And maybe this time it would need to be BYD Sunderland or something like that. But it is a fantastic place to build cars for all the reasons, Steve, you talked about. I think there's a lot of negotiation going on. A lot of people say, oh, well, we're not going to build in the UK unless you give us money. That's a negotiation. That's not because it's a crap place to build cars.
Joe's question on carbon capture and storage.
Carbon capture and storage, right. So there will be no carbon capture post-combustion on gas power stations. It doesn't matter what the government says and how much they try. It's a really stupid idea because carbon capture and storage, particularly post-combustion, it's incredibly capital intensive, and then there's a thermodynamic parasitic load, you know, it costs money to run. It's expensive. You don't build huge, expensive things and then run them intermittently. That makes no sense whatsoever, right? And that's what post-combustion CCS would be, because you've got all this wind, all this solar, frankly, everywhere in the world, that's what they're building. And so what you would have to do to amortize your capital is to run the CCS plant, even though it's windy and sunny, which is, of course, what we're doing already with Scottish wind and so on. But it would be absolutely mad to do that. So we won't. I just don't believe the economics can be made to work. Nobody would build it. No investor would put their money into it without a guarantee that it would run a certain number of hours or whatever. And when you actually do the maths and you work out what that will cost, it's colossal. We will do CCS, though, before you celebrate, right? And we will do CCS on process emissions, cement, maybe steel. It'll just be the cheapest way of dealing with some of the CO2 emissions, particularly from processors. We will do, for biogenic carbon removal is going to be cheaper than things like aviation fuels, and it's going to be cheaper than perhaps even shipping fuels. And there's going to be a number of very stubborn sectors where, frankly, and it won't be probably Drax, because we all know we hate Drax, so I'm not going there necessarily. But biogenic carbon removal with some sort of CCS is probably going to be a thing. And we should be focusing on how to do it right, rather than just to say it's outrageous and, and we shouldn't do it at all. And then the third thing we will be doing with CCS is blue hydrogen. And the reason we'll be doing that is because hydrogen producers, producing hydrogen for fertilizers and petrochemicals is between 2 and 2.5% of global emissions. And it would be lovely if green hydrogen could be done very cheaply. The problem with green hydrogen is, number one, every kilowatt hour you use to do it could be better used in a heat pump or an EV or pushing coal off the grid. So there's an opportunity cost of green hydrogen, which is unacceptable, and also a cost of green hydrogen, which is unacceptable. It's just too damn expensive. So we should be letting fabulous companies, and I'm sorry, some of them are oil and gas companies, some of them are fertilizer companies, we should be forcing them to do blue hydrogen right. And that means upstream emissions, high degree of capture, permanent sequestration, and so on. And that's what CCS is going to be about.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Sue, do you agree with that? We've seen the government bring forward this quite large sort of investment plan in CCUS. What's your...
I agree with Michael. I think the future of CCUS is in decarbonising intensive industrial processes. If we are serious about being a modern industrial economy, we're still going to need a cement industry, we're still going to need a steel industry, and CCUS is the way to do that.
Anything you want to add, Steve, or I'll move on to...
Just a very, very quick comeback. Yeah, I mean, Aston Martin, for example, a wonderful, wonderful car manufacturer. They employ 2,000 people. I'm talking about mass car manufacturing and the economic and social devastation if we lose that.
Okay, so...
And then, was there a question?
That's enough on cars.
I guess I think we can keep it.
Okay, okay. So we've got... You can pick it up afterwards. Rachel's question, what's one thing you would do to encourage investment, particularly on the demand side? Perhaps I can start with you on that one, Sue.
Well, look, what companies say to us all the time is that they need certainty and stability. And I think Rachel's right. I think there is a willingness to invest, but still a feeling that the climate is a bit uncertain, whether it's the economic climate or the industrial strategy or whatever. So I think it's about being serious about having a long-term industrial and energy strategy, creating that stability and certainty for investment, and then companies have to invest. Alongside that, they need to invest in skills as well.
Steve, your thoughts on this? And I guess one thing is, as we approach a budget, quite a lot of investors complain about the fact that there's all kinds of noises about what taxes are going to go up and so on. I mean, yeah, do you think that's a problem?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I completely agree, especially on skills. I mean, skills are probably the one thing. Skills bottlenecks are probably the one thing that really could scupper the green transition. We have a terrible skill. Well, we have a good skills system, but it's a good one at producing graduates to work in London in financial and business services. It's not to do other things. So we need a skills system that can do other things, such as reindustrialising and working on the green transition. Yeah, budget. I mean, I don't know why they do this, floating all these obviously increasingly daft ideas for new tax rises. I assume it's so when she actually delivers the budget, it's actually a bit of a letdown because, you know, your pension's not going to be grabbed and your house is not going to be taxed out of existence. So I assume that's why they're doing that, but it's really unhelpful for business investment, and I just don't see the point.
Okay. Michael, one magic trick?
So one I've already said, which is this virtuous circle to get the electricity price down, because that's the single sort of, that's the magic bullet on the demand side, just make electricity cheaper. But since I've already said that, my one would be heat pumps. Having some sort of strategy for heat pumps, domestic and commercial, that actually matches human behavior rather than being based in a sort of fantasy technocrats model of how you get things done. It's a criticism of all governments so far to be honest.
Michael, just on that, I mean, why do you think they haven't acted on that? Because Ed Miliband has promised that electricity bills will be lower at the next election.
I don't think there's a single senior politician or SPAD who knows a single heating engineer.
Okay. Right, well, we will come on to Charles's question. So Charles was on decentralisation and the Internet of Energy. Who wants to have something to say on that?
It sounds a wonderful idea. If only I knew what it was.
Charles, do you want to come back and explain a bit more?
It's the new nodes of the Internet of Energy being community-based energy schemes that are based on solar, wind, batteries, plus robotics and AI, that are the nodes that then become connected up into the web, just like we did with information. We do it with energy, and you then get potentially an abundance or even superabundance of clean energy that becomes an innovation zone. Hackney is a good example. I've got any people from Hackney here. They're doing what I'd call a stellar nursery if you've read the book Stellar.
Michael.
This is about the new paradigm beyond extraction, based on the Internet of Energy.
So I think if we were to be building a grid for the first time, you would be building it from the edge in, right? You would do, 10,000 Hackneys, and then you'd say, well, what can't you do in Hackney? Well, you can't make cars in Hackney, right? So how would you then?
Sure, you can.
How would you then? Well, I'm sure. I'll between us.
We'll find a way. We'll find a way.
We're gonna talk afterwards about making cars. New car company, the Hackney cab, we'll call it. But then you would say, well, how can you accrue enough energy in one place for energy-intensive industries and so on? But the fact is, there's an enormous amount of inertia in the system that we built. We electrified by building large centralized power stations, and the entire, not just the transmission grid, but also the entire regulatory book is built around a certain model of the power system. So we've now got to, we're not going to scrap all of that. Anybody who thinks we can, I used to, when I didn't have grey hair and so on, I used to think, well, we'll just tear up the regulatory book and we'll start again. And now I know about, all sorts of things like REMA and LOLLOP and VOLOP pricing and all sorts of, arcana of the way the grid, and it's the most complex machine conceivable. By the way, not just the UK, but Europe, the grid that we've got is a massive competitive advantage, right? The same frequency, the same voltage, except for occasionally in Spain and Portugal, from Estonia all the way through to Cadiz, and from Normandy all the way over to Ukraine. It's incredible, and it's really, really reliable. It's ridiculously reliable. So that's a huge competitive advantage. And by the way, Europe and the UK are really good at high voltage DC and the AI and the software to manage it. So we have some huge advantages. Do they go all the way down to the kind of that distributed model? No. I think, we will do a lot more of, whether it's, now you've got to the point where solar and batteries at the home level, the community level, they can only do so much, but we clearly are going to do a lot more of that. So I'm quite optimistic about that, if I'm honest, simply because it's gotten to a price point where it's starting to make sense and fly under its own locomotion rather than just regulatory push or free money.
Okay, thanks, Michael. So we've got time for 3 more questions. I'll take 2 here. Have we got 1 more? Yeah, down here. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. My name's Olivia Rodgard. I'm a reporter at Bloomberg. I write about the consumer and the individual and how they interact with climate change. I'm curious about the global context here. Obviously, the world has changed quite significantly from a political perspective. If you look at the US, there's been a systematic dismantling of the IRA, a lot of the incentives there, a lot of businesses who thought they were going to come into a lot of government help and that maybe aren't getting it anymore, industries that maybe are looking around. Are there ways that the government here could be taking advantage of that? Any particular industries that they could be sort of picking up on? Do you see any signs of that happening? Thanks.
Taking advantage of what happens in the US, okay.
Thank you. Ashok Sinha, CEO of Ashton Climate Solutions. A business,
Ashok.
Ashton Climate Solutions,
Yeah.
Ashok Sinha.
Yeah.
So business routinely says that political uncertainty or uncertainty is the enemy of investment. Title of this conference is Rebuilding the Environmental Consensus. Political consensus hitherto has arguably been critically important to the progress we've seen so far. Question from Michael. A short while ago on LinkedIn, you said you would resign the Conservative Party membership after 28 years if there wasn't a challenger to Kemi Badenoch by Christmas. I'm tempted to say, how's it going? But, but put that aside for a second. If we assume that Kemi Badenoch remains the opposition leader for the remainder of this parliamentary term, can we rebuild something of a political consensus?
Okay, very interesting. And one more down here.
Holly from Green Alliance, sorry, everyone. Just a very quick one, because I think quite a lot of this conversation has been quite techie. So just thinking about kind of the bigger picture in which this sits, what do the panel think about the political context in which deindustrialisation particularly is playing into our politics and feeding some of the right-wing narratives that we are particularly seeing from Reform and figures on the right as a way to talk to people on the ground?
Okay, Sue, I might start with you on that. I mean, particularly the first question on whether we could sort of take advantage of the IRA being dismantled over in the States, but also potentially that last question is quite relevant to some of the work you do, I think.
So on the first question, I think we can learn from the IRA and what happened there, some of which was hugely positive. A lot of it has fallen away, obviously, since then. But in terms of its forward-looking approach and the way that it's brought together some businesses with unions to work progressively on what the future of energy looks like, including decentralised energy systems, absolutely we can learn from that. Where I think the advantage is not specifically in relation to the IRA, but the Trump attack on climate and science, and I think we are already seeing a dividend in emigration from the US to the UK in terms of R&D and scientific expertise, and that's all to the good. Look, this issue about we need to decarbonise. If we decarbonise and deindustrialise, then the future is a reform future. And whatever you voted at the last election, that doesn't look to me like a good option. So that's why it's really important that we have a process of fair transition. Now, this is about taking people with you. So earlier this morning, we talked about air travel and train travel. Well, do you know why working class people take air travel? Because it's cheaper than travelling by train. So we need to think about the specific situation of different communities. Now, I can think about some of our clusters of membership in West Cumbria, in the southwest, on the east coast. They're not all in the same position, but they do have a deindustrialisation and job quality issue, which means that unless we invest in the UK, unless we do a process of fair transition, the change that we all say is coming is not going to be the change that we want to see, because it's going to be a change about division. It's already there. I go out of London a lot, and I talk to lots of members who feel like decisions are being made about them, not with them. And yes, it's a different process. It's a different process of engagement. So we do have to be concerned about economic growth. We do have to be concerned about deindustrialisation. But for me, ultimately, we've got to get the people and place equation right.
Just to pick up on the IRA, because I suppose in some ways you could argue that some of the breakdown in consensus in America could be a potential sort of vision of where we might be heading if we don't get things right. And I guess what was striking about the Biden approach was it seemed like an awful lot of work was put into thinking about workers, the kind of blue-green politics of that transition, good jobs, all of that kind of stuff. So do you take any lessons from that for Britain, the way that's sort of fallen apart?
So I was fortunate enough to go over to the US during the Biden administration and talk to unions there who were directly involved in that programme, and to some of the government officials. And one of the things that I took away from that was that they said they'd wish they'd had more time to prepare, to future-proof it, and to really embed it as the way of doing business. And that's really why I talk about the importance of a planned approach, not waiting for these things to happen. We need to be thinking and working on those changes now. And we need to be future-proofing. Look, for me, the next 2 years is critical. Unless we start to deliver some of this change and embed it in a way that communities can actually see it's making a practical difference to them, then we are going to be vulnerable to it being taken away and wound back. But if you can deliver change, if you can deliver good jobs, then people will want to keep those good jobs.
Yep.
And that's what we've got to do.
Steve, do you want to pick up on any of those questions, perhaps particularly the politics of deindustrialisation?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we talk about this all the time in Green Alliance, because we're in a democracy, so you need to bring people with you, and the alternatives are not very inspiring. Personally, I think it just comes down to people's incomes and the quality of public services. And sorting that out requires sorting out the public finances, which I mentioned before are dire. To sort out the public finances, I think we need to get growth. The green economy, as we've been discussing, has an important part to play in that. We can speed it up. We can try and spread out this growth, but we do need growth. And until we get that, I think this government's in trouble because it's not palpably improving people's lives. And when it's not doing that, it's in trouble itself. And also there are scapegoats available, and one of the scapegoats available is net zero, because net zero is one of the government's flagship policies, partly because Ed Miliband is so effective. It's seen as a big totem. Reform, who actually weirdly are in our building, and there's several floors below. You can tell when Nigel's in the building.
We don't talk to each other.
We don't talk to each other, but we can smell his cigarettes. I honestly think, why are they so anti-net zero? Is it simply, have they done any reasoned analysis and found out, no, this actually doesn't make sense? We've looked at the Excel charts, it doesn't make any sense. I honestly believe they think, well, Guardian readers like net zero, we hate Guardian readers, therefore we're against it. So I think if the government can make and we and us can make a strong case that no, it's about lower energy bills, jobs, and economic security, then I think we may chip away at this view that they've taken, in which unfortunately the Conservatives, they seem to be rather sheep-like at the moment.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned it, but Richard Tice's policy of being prepared to sort of rip up contracts for renewable energy, I think would be quite harmful to investment. Michael, tell us about the state of your Conservative membership card.
Yeah. Hanging on by its fingernails. So, Asha, great to see you. I'd spotted you there in the audience. I was wondering if you're going to come after me on that. So, yeah, that's right. I wrote on LinkedIn and on Blue Sky, and actually I'm still on, I'm not sure what to call it, shitter I usually call it, sorry, pardon my French, because it's spelt with an X. And so I posted it, and I said that, that essentially, if the Conservative Party's policy is going to be to get rid of the Climate Change Act, then I'm kind of done. And I said by Christmas, I think if I'm allowed to resile from that slightly, I would actually wait until after the elections in May and then see, because it's more likely there'll be a challenger after a disastrous performance in May. I think it's an unbelievably stupid policy direction for the Conservative Party under Kemi Badenoch, whom I've worked with. I was on the Board of Trade and I worked with her. She's not a foolish person, but she's making a huge mistake because there's such an absolutely open space for a, let's call it sensible centre, I called it in the Pragmatic Climate Reset, but a centre-right, sort of one nation, climate aware. There's this huge area to go for. Chasing after reform, becoming kind of reform light or reform civilized or whatever the current strategy is, it's just a really stupid strategy. It's not going to work. And as there are all these concerns about the government and its inability to provoke growth and to make people's lives better, that leaves a huge space to go for. And I can tell you the responses to the Pragmatic Climate Reset, there's a lot of people who are, who it resonated with a lot of people. A lot of people on the right And a large number of people also on the left. I had somebody who said, I'm a socialist and I agree with Michael. And he was very upset about that. But so I think there is definitely political space there. The tragedy is, and I'll tell you this, I don't know how many people here are from a sort of centre-right tradition, but net zero, Ed Miliband, and the Climate Change Act are right now seen on the right as a unit. And so if you want to get rid of the government, i.e. Ed Miliband, that means getting rid of the Climate Change Act and net zero. And I think that's, if you want to talk about rebuilding the environmental consensus, then there has to be clear blue water, clear green water, clear water of any sort between the current government's policies, which are driving up the cost of electricity, which is the opposite of that. It's the opposite of a virtuous circle that pushes down electricity costs, gets this stuff moving, creates wealth, creates the jobs, etc. The opposite of that is the circle of doom, the spiral of doom. And we're in the spiral of doom, and it's a tragedy. And I don't see, that's what we need to be addressing. Can I just, one other thing, can we just do a little audience poll of how many, right, can everybody put up one hand in the air? Put one hand up, because I want everybody to participate in this. One hand up, right. Now, those people who have read the Climate Change Act, actually read it in the last 10 years, keep your hands up. Okay, now we're in a fight for this thing, right? Because if you want that act to remain on the books, you have to go out there and fight for it, and you haven't even read it, most of you, okay? And I can tell you that the Conservatives, who are all crowing about how, oh, now our policy finally is rational, we're going to get rid of it, none of them have read it. None of the people at the Conservative Party conference had read that thing. And by the way, Richard Tice hasn't read it, Nigel Farage hasn't read it, and the rest of the Reform lot haven't read it either. So if you want to have a street fight, then go and read it, because I'll tell you something, there is one energy technology that it mentions. Can I tell you what it is? Carrier bags. It doesn't talk about CCS, it doesn't talk about electrification, it doesn't talk about none of that. None of that. Just go and read it, you'll be amazed.
Okay, well thank you, Michael. That's a more optimistic note to end on than the spiral of doom. Go and read the Climate Change Act in the lunch break. So it's now lunch, so you're back in here at 2:15. Sean, Spears and Dara Vias, but thank you to all of you for your questions, and thanks to my panel.